Many of us have long believed Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 elections were illegal. And today, a federal judge has come to the same conclusion, ruling the former president more likely than not committed a felony. The judge is ordering Trump ally John Eastman to hand over more than 100 emails exchanged about attempts to overturn the election to the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Eastman had argued the exchanges were protected by attorney-client privilege, but according to today's ruling, their plan obviously violated federal law and should be investigated. Of course, Eastman can still appeal that ruling to the Ninth Circuit Court and then to the Supreme Court, where he may have a very friendly ear, that of Justice Clarence Thomas. As has been widely reported over the past few days, the Washington Post and CBS News uncovered texts sent after the 2020 election from Thomas's wife, conservative activist Virginia Ginni Thomas, to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. In them, she not only pushes him to overturn the presidential results, she advises on legal strategy, including pushing for soon-to-be-declared too out there even for Trump, Sidney Powell, to head up the legal team. Among other texts, Ginni Thomas says the Meadows do not concede. It takes time for the army who is gathering for his back and, quote, make a plan, release the Kraken and save us from the left taking America down. Release the Kraken. Unsurprisingly, the House Select Committee reportedly wants to directly interview Ginni Thomas over all this, but the biggest question is about Clarence Thomas, what he knew about his wife's involvement in matters before the court and whether that affected his decision-making.
You have the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice advocating for an insurrection, advocating for overturning a legal election to the sitting president's chief of staff. And she also knows this election, these cases are going to come before her husband. This is a textbook case for removing him, recusing him from these decisions. Not only should he recuse himself, but this Supreme Court badly needs ethics rules.
I'm joined now by constitutional law expert and BU law professor Jessica Silbey and Emily Bazelon, staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, Yale Law School research fellow, co-host of Slate's Political Gabfest podcast, and the author of a fabulous book on mass incarceration called Charged. Jessica and Emily, it's good to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So, Jessica, starting with you, Supreme Court justices are required, I'm reading, to recuse if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. But other than a justice or a justice-to-be, like Ketanji Brown Jackson the other day saying voluntarily she'd recuse herself from a Harvard affirmative action case, there's no enforcement mechanism, so the rules are meaningless, correct?
Well, I wouldn't say they're meaningless. Judges care a lot about their own legitimacy and their own reputation, but it is a court of last resort. There is no appeal from the Supreme Court, so if they do not recuse themselves, there is nothing to do about that.
You know, even if, and we'll get to this in a second, Emily, even if Justice Thomas knew nothing about the text from his wife to Mark Meadows, it is fair to say that he's been a serial violator of this appearance of impartiality thing through the years. Is it not?
I think what matters here is this problem of appearance of impropriety, right? So it's one thing to say that we know for sure that Justice Thomas knew that his own wife's text would come to light if he voted a certain way about this appeal. And it's another to just worry about what it means for the court's institutional legitimacy to have a justice helping to decide these cases when clearly his wife's reputation is at part at stake. And so I think that is really what is at issue here. It's Justice Thomas's reputation and then also what this means for the Supreme Court.
Well, I want to stay away from the text just for a second. What I was referencing when I said that I thought he was clearly a serial violator, Emily, was one, he obviously knows that she has been involved in organizations that have filed friend of the court briefs, has been in partnership with organizations that actually had cases before the Supreme Court. And I mentioned at the top of the show, which I wasn't aware of till Jane Mayer wrote about it, I must have just missed it, that she took $200,000 from groups that were against the Muslim travel ban the year before he voted against the Muslim travel ban. It seems to me, case closed, is it not?
So what's tricky about this is they're not the same person. So on the one hand, we are holding him responsible for her actions. And he has talked about this idea that they are melded into one being.
I know he has.
Which certainly invites that kind of interpretation. On the other hand, she is her own person. Being someone's spouse is not the same thing as being the justice oneself. And to me, it is really this latest example that I think for legal ethicists most clearly crosses a line. Although I agree with you that the pattern coming up to this point also suggests that there are a lot of reasons why the appearance of impropriety is a problem here.
You know, Jessica, I promise I am going to get to the text in a second, but I want to stay on this just for a second. I'm not suggesting if she wants to be a QAnon sympathizer with watermarks allegedly on the ballots, as she said to Mark Meadows, or if she wants to send insane texts to the chief of staff of the president. That is perfectly her right to do it. But if she does it, and he knows or should know, then the problem is in his lap. Am I not right about that?
Well, I do think the court's legitimacy as a whole matters. It's not only about him as a single justice. So one hopes that the norms of the court matter and inform the group. I think one of the things that is worrisome is when one justice goes rogue and just doesn't follow the rules that everyone else is following, for example. And if that's the appearance that is being given here, that is certainly a problem, not only for the chief, but for the court's own legitimacy entirely.
Well, except for the fact that my understanding is Justice Roberts says things like, and I'm paraphrasing in the past, I have complete confidence in the integrity of all my colleagues and that they will do the right thing around issues of recusal, basically saying every man and woman for themselves, and I'll cover my eyes and hope they do the right thing. He has said that, has he not?
He has said that in his 2011 judicial report to the court, yes. And I think that when chiefs say that, when bosses say that, it's not only because they might feel that way, but they're also trying to urge their associates to act accordingly. So
let's finally get to the text, Emily Bazelon. Let me just read you one little excerpt from the reporting of Robert Costa and Bob Woodward. This first one is from Meadows himself. This is a fight of good versus evil. Evil always looks like the victor until the King of Kings triumphs. Do not grow weary in well-doing. The fight continues. I've staked my career on it. Well, at least my time in D.C. on it. And then Thomas's reply is, thank you. Needed that. This plus a conversation with my best friend just now. I'll try to keep holding on. America's worth it. As we've all learned, thanks to Jane Mayer's reporting again, the Thomases regularly refer to each other as best friends. So it seems to me, if that circumstantial evidence is added to her admission, I think it was mid-March, to a Washington paper that she was at the Stop the Steal rally, and I'm guessing if she told a paper, she probably told her husband, at least the circumstantial evidence is pretty damning for him having ruled not to turn over these documents. Don't you think?
Well, I think what we're kind of dancing around here is that on the one hand, we don't know for sure what he knew. And on the other hand, it's hard to imagine that a couple that's talked about being so close wouldn't be discussing Ginni Thomas's involvement in the Stop the Steal movement, in going to the January 6th protest. And that's the sort of crux of it here. I'd also argue that going forward, it is clear now that Justice Thomas knows about these texts just like the rest of us. And so there are cases, including the case involving John Eastman that you mentioned, that very well may be appealed to the Supreme Court in the future, soon. And in those cases, I think it will be quite difficult to understand why Justice Thomas would not recuse himself going forward.
Emily, can I address what I'll describe as your reluctance to meet me on this? Can we just take the one example that I mentioned a minute ago? My understanding is, if Jane Mayer's excellent reporting is to be believed, $200,000 from a group over 2 years that supported the Muslim travel ban. The next year, Justice Thomas rules on the travel ban and rules in favor of it. Is that not that? There's no dispute about that being public knowledge. I'm assuming he had to report it on his disclosure form. How can that possibly be ethical?
I just want to add that was a 5-4 decision as well.
So
his recusal would have made a difference.
How about that, Emily?
I mean, I don't really want to stand up for his ethics here, right? The only thing I will say about this is that she is not him and he is not her. And so I think one of the things that legal ethicists struggle with is how to see one spouse's zone of influence and zone of activity as separate from the other person's.
But why is that, if I may, why is that complex, Emily? The answer is she can do whatever the hell she pleases. Can't she? The issue is what he can do. Emily.
Well, right, but if she can do whatever she pleases, then why are we pinning this $200,000 on him if it's her money, her activity?
Because her getting paid by an organization that has an issue before the court creates, let me read it again, at least an appearance of impartiality. It might reasonably be questioned, no?
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to argue with the appearance standard. And I think, it's relevant here that when Chief Justice Roberts joined the court, his wife was on the board of an organization called Feminists for Life. And she left that board because they were concerned about exactly these issues of appearance of impropriety. So if you're talking about appearance, I think the Thomases have a problem.
Jessica, you seem to want to say something about that. Did you? Or?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the idea that spouses don't have to give up their lives because they have a justice as a partner. Right. I just want to double down on the idea that so Justice Thomas may feel like an outlier at this point, but the court does things that feel partisan and impartial all the time. The question is, what are they going to do about it now at a time when the court's legitimacy is really at stake? We're in the middle of a new confirmation proceeding. We might be having more confirmation proceedings in the future. Justice Gorsuch is sitting in a seat that might not have been his. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why at this moment, recusal might be really important compared to other times when they might not have recused under other circumstances. So I feel like context matters here tremendously.
Jessica, let me just stay with you for a minute. I hope I get this right. I think I did. A former judge, Nancy Gertner, was with me a couple of weeks ago, and she served on Biden's commission on the Supreme Court and whether there should be any changes, whether it's court expansion, term limits, et cetera. And what I'm 90% sure she said to me around these ethics issues, and this preceded this whole text question, was the notion of creating a body of retired Supreme Court justices who would be the court, for lack of a better expression, of last resort on some of these ethical issues. One, is that a good idea? And two, does it have a snowball's chance in hell of being approved by whomever it is that would have the approval authority? Jessica first.
So the question of who regulates the court is a good question. I mean, the court takes its cue from the Constitution, and Congress can't tell the Supreme Court what to do. They can strip it of jurisdiction, they can add more justices, but the idea that somebody is going to tell the Supreme Court how to rule or when to recuse is an independence of the judiciary problem. So no, I think it's unlikely that something like that would get by. But the idea that there would be counselors to the court, I mean, the Chief Justice Roberts has said that the Code of Conduct is not the only body of law that you go to. You can ask for legal counsel, you can ask your colleagues. And so the idea that there may be an advisory body that would add legitimacy to the decision to recuse or not to recuse seems to me an extra authority that they might want to look to.
Emily, do we get an extra authority, to use Jessica's words, or is it essentially going to remain up to the 9 justices to make their own decisions about ethics?
The cleanest solution here is for the court to impose ethical rules on itself. It's for the court to set up some kind of oversight over individual justices' decisions so that they are not threatening their own legitimacy in this way. And
who would enforce that?
I mean, the court, once the court sets the rules, can also set up an enforcement mechanism, right? So, I mean, ideally, to address Jessica's point, you want the regulation and the enforcement to be within the judicial branch. But once the court makes the rules, then you could have oversight given over to some retired justices, some other appeals court justices. There are various ways you could get around this problem. They just have to be motivated to do something about it.
They could say that the Code of Conduct applies to them too. Justice Roberts did not say that. He said explicitly that it does not, but they follow it. They could start there and say that it does.
I'll vote for that with no power at all. Jessica Silbey and Emily Bazelon, really appreciate your thoughts. Thanks so much for your time.
Bye. Thanks for having us.